I'm Margaret in Windsor, and I'm sitting up here. I was thinking, and I wanted to put something else up here. I put it up before, but it's mixed in with all the other videos. Over time, I put it up a couple of times, but I'm going to go back to Moonraker. When I lived there and I was doing the book, MD License to Kill, about the Tesla files, about murders being committed using mind control. Where you can cure an illness or create one. So you've had cures for illnesses, cancer, all of it, all along. So what's going on with this research when you already have a cure? Anyway, the Tesla files were supposed to be stolen in 30, and supposedly Donald Trump's uncle was a MIT professor, and he helped in stealing the files. Actually, well, that's the way history has it. And then the FBI got a hold of them, but the Illuminati are the ones that actually stole them. So, I mean, and I'm writing about that, and fast forward here after all these years that hell has, uh, it's been hell, believe me, for telling the truth and finding out that I'm Margaret Ann Wynn's heir to the British Crown. And my father's Edward VIII, who didn't marry Wallace Simpson. He was married to my mom, Claudia Ruth O'Keefe Windsor, from Madison, Wisconsin, sister to artist Georgia O'Keefe. So this was all a lie. She married an imposter, and there were 3 or 4, I don't know how many, pretending to be my father. And this is still going on today with everybody knowing Elizabeth has always known. Um, I'm not going to go back into that again. I was kidnapped in 41 and born in 39. And the day I was born, I'm Victoria II, the legal heir. So Elizabeth is a war criminal. She's illegal, a fake monarchy. But I wanted to get to this it was the reason for putting this up. Uh, when I was doing the book, I started doing the book in '76. I was living at Moonraker in Marietta. No, excuse me, I was living at Treetop in Marietta Apartments. I moved from there. I'm working for a group of doctors, and I moved from there to well, not far in Marietta to Moonraker Apartments, which Moonraker became a movie, a title of a movie with Roger Moore, where he's 007. And it even had mind control and up in space. If you watch that, go back and it relates to what I'm saying. But this is done after was writing the book a couple of years later, and after I was almost killed and had a letter from the FBI June the 23rd of '79. So now then, after then, was Timothy Dalton, 007, associated with the Queen, is what 007 is. And the title of his movie was A License to Kill. So they've backed me up on all this, really. But back to this. While this is going on, there's well, you can get set up this way. You can't now, but phones are different. But back then, it was a lot of detective work on my part and research, and all hell going on with me and the children that were terrifying us. Anyway, my son, I hesitate to put anything up anymore. Um, their lives, I hope they're alive. They're heirs after me, not Charles or not Elizabeth or not her father, George the Sixth Illuminati, made him king after, or well, he's not really king, but you get the point. My father wouldn't follow the orders, so they took him out with character assassination, then kidnapped his daughter, me, the real monarch. Gave me another name in Moulton, Alabama, and I've got all this up. What I wanted to put here was I'm going back to, okay, let me think, it's 70, okay, Larry Flint was shot in Lawrenceville, Georgia by a man who was programmed, just like the person was programmed to shoot George Wallace, that all these murders are happening that they put up on TV. And I've explained this. They put the ones up, which makes you wonder. There's a lot of murders goes on that doesn't use mind control on people. These happen, and they can be done in patterns, the ones I've spoken of, which has been most of them, um, over these years. Now, the real issue here I wanted to tell was my son Mark worked his off. He really did. In the cold, he cleaned planes. And first, let me go to this though. I'm a moonraker, and my husband, by the way, got me a little gizmo back then that you ordered and handed it to me that you could check if your phone was bugged. Remember, this is back antiquated, I suppose, from now. But anyway, I sit there and I've gone into all this. It was rough what I did try and find out. Found out that Southern Bell was putting I would see their truck on the side of Delk Road there. And it went on around to the Southern Bell headquarters there. I don't remember the name of that Delk dumped into. And I'm being hassled, my children are. Anyway, I picked up this little red beep with it. I'm sitting there in Moonraker, and my children are so confused and so hurt by what's happening, and intimidated and scared to death. Oh, and I'm keeping records of all this, writing it down and trying to write the book and work for the doctors. Okay, now then, the little red beep beep, you could follow with the Southern Bell. When it moved, they were putting in a cable or something. So this little beep beep would come up on my phone. That it's tapped, wiretapped. Okay, Tenneco was right there at where I ended up on May the 8th of 79. After Moonraker, I moved up Delk Road, which was just a couple, 3, 4 blocks up the street. But at the corner here was Tenneco, and that's an all-night, well, it wasn't all night, but it's a gas station and grocery convenience store, which is pretty nice. They're in the South. I don't know if they're still there or what. Anyway, this Southern Bell truck I'm tracking is sitting there for 3 or 4 days. And I'm tracking it sitting still. The beep beep's going off on my little gizmo that tracks it while it's sitting there. And I became friends of the manager of, and I've forgotten his name now, of Tenneco. He had come down and he had a daughter, and I don't remember now. A very nice man. But anyway, we were talking about it because the truck sat right in front, and that's when, for a few days of Tenneco. Now then, finally that is finished, and the Southern Bell truck that I'm tracking is going on down Delk, and it's going to go down and turn later. Quite odd. Anyway, you could track it. And I'm leaving out some other stuff because I wanted to get this up if I may. During this time, a whole lot happened. It was horrible. I hired a Burns Detective Agency, and it gets into who comes out. He brings out the Phillips, L.C. Phillips, and his sister Boots, Ruby, and they were out behind, not even supposed to be in Cobb County. I've told this. What I want to get to here is the fact that we had just moved up to Laurelwood from Moonraker. And my son went to work for Tenneco. He only worked there a couple of nights, and oh wow. The manager, Tenneco, I'm just talking about, that was nice and everything. They had moved there, and that's where the Bell truck had been sitting and doing underground cabling it, but it sat there for a number of days right in front of Tenneco, and I tracked it, and I was talking to him about it. Well, this will scare people. It should. But then they scare away from me, most. They decide they don't want to. Anyway, I'm not applying this to one person. I hope he hangs in there. Well, I wish more than one would. But anyway, well, my son went to work for him right after we'd moved up the street to Laurelwood Apartments, Bentley Drive, Marietta. Okay, Mark goes to work there, and he works at Epps. Oh, excuse me, he's working there at Tenneco, and he worked there a couple of nights. And this is when this happened. The night manager there that I'd been talking about was gunned down. He was going home, closing up at 11 o'clock that night, and there was a black man, quite frankly, shot him when he came out and tried to get in his car. And I don't remember how that played out, but he killed him right there. I remember they said that somebody had used a payphone and called that something was odd, and had the police gotten there a few minutes earlier, they would have saved his life. Okay, now then, Mark, my son's scared to death. Obviously, he and Scott were brave. So much was done to us. He then went to work for Epps Air Service. Now, Epps Air is three brothers that started Epps Air Service years and years ago. So they own the home company was in Birmingham, I believe, Alabama. Now then, I hope this will go up. Now then, they had a office, Epps did, in Huntsville, Alabama. Okay, out the Huntsville airport. So that gets into another thing. It also gets into the Epps got into, like, I believe one of the Epps was that, yeah, on spacecraft. Anyway, they got into, because NASA space and all that was, it started in Huntsville, Alabama. What do you think? They brought me over. I'm a hostage. Illegal treaty signed. My father wouldn't sign. So they they held me as hostage, not just in money over the board, but that brought scientists over like Werner von Braun, and he was a good man. The Germans, there hasn't been the truth told about any of this, really, till I'm telling it. Your press here is controlled by the Illuminati, and I'm going to have to shut up because it's about 9 o'clock and somebody might be trying to sleep here, and I'm having enough trouble, But anyway, Mark, I wanted to go back then, though. This is about 62, 63, I can't remember. 60. The children were young. And remember, we were invited to. If I knew then what I know now, I couldn't remember I'd been kidnapped then. I found that out after I found that ran in a campaign to replace the doctor I wrote about in the book that wasn't published. I was almost killed. Called Larry McDonald was the doctor congressman in Flint, had been shot by a program shooter, and I'd written about that in the book. And I'm flown out there in that campaign to replace Larry McDonald, supposedly on the KAL that was shot down. This is a question if he was on it August the 31st of 83. So that's the first time I met Mr. Flint, but his shooting had been done in patterns, and I knew it was a mind-controlled shooting. So now then, I'm back where? I'm jumping around here a little bit trying to get it up. Anyway, the Epps, back then, Mark had gone to work there in 70, this would have been 79, I guess. Yeah, mid-May, I think, of 79, or the last of May of 79. Okay, after the Tenneco, and worked there a couple of nights, and I told you what happened. Now then, backtrack to Epps had the one in Chamblee, Georgia, Air Service. That's where Mark worked. Okay, They had one in Huntsville. That was NASA and everything. And I was telling about this. And then the home office was in Birmingham, Alabama. And they were brothers. Now then, my husband worked for NASA too. So this is backtracked to 60. Before then, 62, the boys were young, really little. My husband flew airplanes. And he flew me and the boys. There was Independence Day. Can you imagine? Later I found out who I am. I wouldn't have gone out to celebrate my demise, you know. But anyway, we flew into the small little runway landing there they had. Now later I understand there were drugs being brought in there. But anyway, I remember when we walked in this beautiful home and layout and everybody's there and they're into the space industry and I think they had spacecraft and it grew to be big. They were into banking. So they were quite wealthy, as a lot of people got there in Huntsville because of the space program. Now then, I found, by the way, Scott was almost killed. When we come in there, I don't know how it happened, but they almost drowned him. This was a fence, and somebody was screaming. He shouldn't even have been in there. Couldn't have gotten in. We will just walk past there. I don't know how it happened. Okay, now then I want to get back to, they had something lying on his neck under the water. So that had to happen real quick. So now then, this is back to Huntsville. Back to Atlanta, back to Marietta. And I'm doing the book, trying to get it published. Mark's going to work for Epps Air Service there in Chamblee, Atlanta. Okay. Not long after Mark went to work there were drugs being, it was said that drugs were being brought in to Epps Air Service there. Had a big layout. It's a big place they own in each Huntsville or Birmingham and etc. And anyway, it turned out that right after Mark went to work there, drugs were supposed to be coming in. And I was doing the book and everything, putting this puzzle together. That's what it's been. Now that on TV and briefly in the paper there, which would have been the Atlanta Journal, it tells on the news briefly that the Treasury Department, the agent's jet, it's one of those jets that it had a film in it that chased people who were bringing drugs in. Well, it turned out that they were chasing Epps' son, that owner in Chamblee where Mark worked. His son was bringing drugs in, and the Treasury Department, or whoever, I've forgotten now, they're the ones the agents that were chasing Epps' son because they're bringing drugs in. Now, he had a MiG or whatever it was, a jet they was bringing it in on. Anyway, they forced him down. And this is when it got touchy-poo, because it's getting bad there, me doing the book, and I got a letter from the FBI June the 23rd of 79, ongoing investigation, national security involved. Now then you can fast forward to April Fool Day of 80, and I was almost killed. And, I should never have walked away from that. They really got me. And then I never saw my kids again. My apartment was illegally taken, and I've put all this up. It's unbelievable that so much has been allowed to happen. But anyway, Mark is working at the airport out there all this time. And I'm going to fast forward and tell you, or whatever, I'm going to tell you what happened then. They used, this was in the paper briefly and on TV, them flying the plane trying to catch Epps' son with the drugs, and then they did force him down. Now then, Mark, later they used, when I